Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Elitist Geek. It's here, guys. Well, almost here. What's almost here? Virtual reality. This is something, and I said this in a previous video, that I have literally been waiting my entire life for. I remember exactly the thoughts of watching Star Trek The Next Generation and that holodeck. You got to remember and put it into context with what we had at the time, all right? So I was born in the 70s. My formative years were really in the 80s, right? Those were my teen years. And when I watched Star Trek The Next Generation, and warning, this is going to be pretty geek heavy, a lot of people hated Wesley Crusher. But what's funny is, and polls bear this out, the people who tended to not hate Wesley Crusher, can you guess? Were kids around his age. Why? The simple reason we could imagine ourselves being on the Enterprise D, being there and being able to use the holodeck. And it was exactly like Ricky Schroeder, from Silver Spoon, or in Silver Spoon's Ricky Schroeder, who played Rick. I can't remember the last name. But it always bothered me when the storylines didn't involve him playing on the arcade. I was like, dude, there's 6 freaking arcade machines. What are you doing yapping? Play! But he was worried and interested in other things. And I suppose it's always like that. When you have something, you kind of take it for granted. Star Trek was the evolution of that for me, The Next Generation, that is. I couldn't figure out why, and they actually worked that into a storyline with Reg and his holodeck addiction, why people didn't constantly hang out there. So when I went back to talk about, you got to remember the time frame, right? So I'm born in the 70s, I'm raised in the 80s. Dungeons and Dragons is huge, right? Video games were huge in my life, but Dungeons and Dragons was every bit as pivotal. Dungeons and Dragons allowed you to escape the mundane and create graphics in your mind better than any video card out there. And at that time, that wasn't that hard to do, right? You had stuff like Temple of Apshai trilogy from Epix, which used the Dungeons and Dragons rules, but really was so far removed from what a good dungeon master or games master, if you were into Rollmaster at the time, could help you envision, right? Now imagine a holodeck. Any parameter that you want to set up. Medieval Europe, feudal Japan, right? Shaka Zulu's, sub-Saharan Africa. It doesn't matter. You could do it in the holodeck with safety protocols thrown in to keep you safe. And yeah, there were some stories that kind of got around that too, but it's something that I always believed computers would be able to one day do. Now, granted, the Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive and Project Morpheus are no holodecks. But are they a step in that direction? I certainly think so. And I've mentioned this in a previous video as well, but those games that use any of the virtual reality helmets that are going to excel, I believe, are games that are cockpit based, right? Racing games, flying games, space games like Eve, Elite, Star Citizen. Anything that has you sitting in the game in a cockpit, right? Why? Simply because in real life you're sitting to play. So that immersion, that fourth wall is basically torn asunder, because you can look at your avatar in game and see your avatar sitting just like you are in real life. So that sense of immersion is going to be huge, right? So fast forward a little bit. Here we are, first quarter of 2016 calendar year. and you think to yourself, which one should I get? And I've gone back and forth. There were times where I was probably in every camp, but lately I've kind of moved towards the HTC camp. I want to tell you guys why, and be interested in your feedback, and let me know what you think. So resolution-wise, they're roughly the same. It's 2160 by 1200 pixels, roughly 1080p, right? They've all seemed to have eliminated the screen door effect. Screen door effect is when you can see the pixels that make up a picture. And as you can imagine, that's pretty immersion busting, right? Anytime you see a graphic for what it is, it's going to ruin the immersion for you. So apparently the screens that these guys are using have, managed to at least limit that, if not reduce it significantly. I don't think they've completely eliminated it, and I think guys like me who notice one dead pixel on a 4K TV, 10 feet away, are the kind of people that are probably going to notice the screen door effect. But with that said, let's take a look at what differentiates them beyond the resolution. So they got roughly the same resolution. USB requirements are going to be roughly the same. The Oculus Rift stated what theirs were, and it's pretty heavy. It's a couple of USB 3 ports, a couple of USB 2 ports, but let's face it, this day and age, most computers are going to have that free, and if they don't, well, a $10, $15, $20 USB 3.0 expansion card can easily take care of that, right? Graphic cards. If you're a hardcore gamer, you probably got a pretty decent rig. So I've got 7970 in my machine over there that my buddies use when they come over on our gaming nights. Not powerful enough. But this machine, which has two R290s running in Crossfire with an i5 processor and the requisite amount of RAM, meets those specifications. So I'm fine with this computer, right? Controller-wise, the problem is that the HTC had a bulky gamepad style controller, right? And whereas the Oculus Rift's new controller looks pretty cool. It feels and looks more like a Wii style controller, right? Now, apparently HTC is going to have some changes, right? And this is where it gets interesting. This is what kind of pushes me towards the HTC camp, is that it has Valve's backing, right? So you have access to pretty much every Steam game, whereas the Oculus Rift it's not an automatic. Maybe it will be with the drivers, but if you're talking pure game versus game, it looks like the HTC is slightly ahead in terms of compatibility and support. Even titles that I purchased like Elite Dangerous, which have or had Oculus Rift support at one time, and now they're a little bit flaky because, the dev units are different from the commercial units, and I have no doubt they're going to introduce that back in. In fact, I've held off on Elite Dangerous. I haven't played it at all. I bought the game strictly for Oculus Rift because I watched videos on YouTube, and do yourself a favor, if you're not sure about virtual reality, and if you're not sure if it's for you, watch some people using the Oculus Rift with Elite Dangerous. And in almost every case, to them, it's just jaw-dropping, right? They feel like they're in the spaceship. That's the experience I want. That's why I'm waiting. So, at the end of the day, your HDMI requirements, your USB, everything's pretty similar, but I think game support-wise, the HTC is finally ahead. And what really pushed me towards the HTC camp from the Steam camp, and it sounds like such a trivial thing, is a front-mounted camera. A front-mounted camera that allows you to pause the game and see your environment, your real environment, through that camera without having to take the headpiece off. Now, at first pass, that doesn't seem like a bad thing, right? Okay, so you got to remove your helmet. Well, depending on how the calibration works on these things, not only is it ruin the immersion, but constantly having to take off and don your helmet, your VR helmet, is going to be a pain in the ass. To have a front-mounted camera, at least you're going to be able to drink stuff, eat stuff, alt-tab out, surf a little bit, go back into the game. True, with a wired connection, you're not going to get up and go to the bathroom or make yourself, toast or have some Frosted Flake cereal. But it's at least a step in trying to keep you immersed in a world and providing you with an avenue to do the stuff that you need to do, right? Even if it doesn't quite have bio locked down, if you get my drift. So, really interesting to compare these technologies. I don't have any yet. When I do, I'm going to do a video on it, absolutely. If you're still not sure, there's going to be tons of videos out there. But just remember, what you saw with the Dev Kit 1 and Dev Kit 2 is not what you're going to get with the actual release. You're getting better quality screens, you're getting better motion tracking, less screen door effect, etc., etc., etc. So tons of difference, right? Interested in hearing your guys' thoughts. Are you as excited as me about alternate reality, virtual reality? Like, just think about the potential. Not just space games, but, Christ, anything, right? It doesn't have to be limited to just cockpit games, but if it was just cockpit games that delivered the best experience, I'd be okay with that. So, is it a fad? Kind of like the 3D TVs, which nobody really talks about anymore, and 3D movies is kind of, it's thrown in, but it doesn't really have that hype. No, I think it's beyond that. I still think it's more niche than mainstream, but it's definitely not the gimmick that 3D was, because it's so immersive, right? So, interested in hearing your guys' thoughts? Let me know. Until next time, as always, guys, cheers.